How do we make online meetings more engaging? This is a really relevant question because the time that we're meeting in Zoomtown is going up. Right? So luckily, my job is to help some of the most innovative companies and top universities make online connection and engagement really easy. And so in this video, I'm excited to dive into how to do that really practically in a way that doesn't take a ton of extra time and prep for you. Let's get into it. So in this video, I'm going to unpack from all of my work with clients 5 consistent ingredients that if you inject these into your meeting, I guarantee that engagement will go up. And if it doesn't, you can find me, track me down, and write me a message and complain. But I haven't had a meeting, anybody that I've taught these 5 ingredients to, that haven't taken them, applied them adapted them to their own context, and seen a marked increase in engagement and participation and contribution in a given meeting. So we're going to unpack 5 ingredients, and then I'm somebody who likes concrete things. What do I tactically do with my hands, and maybe in the case of meetings with my mouth or my ears, to be able to create more engagement. So I'll also be sharing 4 pro tips that are all take less than a minute to implement, but have a drastic impact on reducing Zoom burnout. Whew. Here we go. Let's dive right in. So 5 ingredients. If you think of your meeting on a timeline, from here to here, from the very start of your meeting, let's say 9 a.m., to the very end of your meeting, let's say 10 a.m., typically, we reward people for being late by kind of waiting a few minutes until Wi-Fi catches up, or Cindy shows up to the meeting a little bit later, whatever. And so we keep everybody who showed up on time and early waiting until everybody's there. And so the first ingredient for engagement in online meetings is to actually kick off with an unofficial start. This is a brilliant concept I got from a good friend named Mark Collard, who is based in Australia, runs a fantastic organization called Playmio. It's a huge database of online experiential collaborative learning exercises. Maybe we'll toss a link to Mark's stuff in the comments. And this idea of the unofficial start is something to spark immediate and purposeful engagement with your group. And so there are lots of ways to do it, but one of my favorite and easiest ways is to come up with a question and that invites people to either share verbally, or if you've got a much larger gathering or meeting, to share in the chat, that allows people to immediately and purposefully engage and sort of warm up a little bit. And you can start interacting with people right from that base, as opposed to 8:57, kind of just waiting, and then at 9 a.m. or 9:03 getting started. So it's a way to honor the people that showed up early, but also allow for understanding that, especially when we're meeting virtually, right? When we commute to our office, we have to go through 3 kids and a dog and Wi-Fi issues and computers restarting. And so lateness sometimes happens unexpectedly. And so creating that unofficial start makes a huge dent in that. The second ingredient, and this is often missed, is framing the context for why we are actually there. So the context for purpose. Priya Parker, in her book, The Art of Gathering, one of my favorite books, talks about meeting for purpose rather than for time. How often do we set meetings for 60 minutes or 30 minutes? And we meet, chat until the very end, and it gets, and then we just walk away, which usually means walk away unfinished, and we need to have another meeting to solve that. And so context is the idea of right at the outset stating your intention for the meeting in a way that doesn't focus on just this person, right? As leaders in meetings, oftentimes we share the purpose as an objective of like, I want to get this done, or I need to get this done. An intention is very different. An intention incorporates the needs of the whole. So right at the very beginning, context, injecting this ingredient is simply making an intention statement that includes the needs of the entire group. In fact, in the Latin root of the word intent or intention means stretching or to stretch. And so I think about intention like a rubber band or an elastic that stretches over the needs of the whole and pulls people together. So we've got unofficial start, we've got context framing that purpose up. The third ingredient is connection before content. And this by far will be the most impactful ingredient on your entire scenario. And typically when we hear the idea of connection before content, something that may come up is, well, we don't have time to connect before we dive into the agenda. We've got a lot of stuff to accomplish, right? And I would actually argue from an engagement perspective, you can't afford not to spend a few minutes connecting before content. And part of the reason is that it shifts people, and this is, I'll embed just in these ingredients, tip number 1, design your meetings for contribution, not consumption. So when you look at your agenda, is it a bunch of report outs that turn people into consumers, or is it actually, are they questions, exercises, conversations, participatory things that invite people to contribute to that overall meeting? Because everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't. And so in your meeting, if only 2 people talk and 7 people sit there and don't say a word, you've lost out on, let's see, the human brain weighs about 8 pounds, so you've lost out on about 40 pounds of brain power in that one particular setting. And so the idea of connection before content is really simply, you connect before you dive into the agenda. However, it is not an icebreaker. So what separates connection before content from just a typical icebreaker or something is that it has to also connect to the purpose of why you are there. So previously, right, you stated your intention and your context. Connection before content then allows people to dive into it, right? So let's just give an example. If your purpose is to unpack everything or debrief everything that happened this quarter so that the group can all learn something to make their jobs easier, right? That intention that benefits them, not just you or not just the company, right? Benefits the actual individuals in that meeting. So to debrief the quarter in a way that everybody learns something to take to make their jobs easier and their life a little bit better. The question that I might ask is, or the connection before content that I might do could be a question, something along the lines of, what is something that you did this quarter that was an aha for you that improved the way you work? Get into small groups of 3, and this depends on meeting size, right? So if you've got a smaller meeting, maybe just split in half, but absolutely divide the meeting. Unless it's less than 4 people, divide the meeting up into smaller groups of 3 to 4 people to answer that question. Answer your connection before content question for a few minutes, and then bring everybody back to the large group and popcorn out those responses. So if you're meeting on Zoom, you can actually do breakouts, right? If you're meeting virtually, or if you're meeting at virtually another platform that doesn't allow breakouts, you may just want to use the chat for this connection before content. But the idea is right at the beginning of your meeting to connect before content, you're inviting people's contribution, not just their consumption. So the fourth ingredient for engagement, and often this is the ingredient that takes up the most time, is your content. Right? It's what you've got mapped out on your agenda. And very simply, the reason that that's one of the 5 ingredients is an invitation to make that content more experiential. So typically we think of content as a consumption model, right? We've got a bunch of report outs, everybody goes around and shares their blah, 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 right? And for the most part, the meeting is very passive. When you're meeting online, you can do something that you can't in person. Everybody can talk at the exact same time, and everybody can listen at the exact same time using the chat. And so brainstorming 101, right, is brainstorm alone first and together second. And so when you're getting into content, utilize the chat, invite people's perspective, constantly turn each agenda item, involve some level of participation, whether it's in the chat or inviting people to unmute and actually kick in quick perspectives. Designing that content for contribution rather than consumption will make a massive difference in the flow of your meeting, even with really technical information and spreadsheets and things like that. The other thing that I would invite, and this is tip number 2 embedded in here in the content, is use analog visuals to represent something, right? So if I'm going to say, hey, I want to ask you all a question that accesses both maybe how you're feeling right now, but also for the left-brained among us, how what you're thinking about. Using analog visuals, meaning stuff you've got lying around your house or your office, rather than just constantly screen sharing PowerPoint, will have a major impact on making your content more engaging. When we screen share, we maximize content and we minimize connection and engagement. And so anytime that you're able to stop screen sharing and get your point across with a visual, right, in some capacity, as I just did a moment ago, or if you say, right, and you're framing your context or saying, hey, this next piece that we're going to get into, wanted to just figure out how we can open some more doors to conversations with new customers. Simple little things like that are actually will hardwire into people's long-term memory more than they will language and numbers, which are wired to go into short-term memory and then hop out. Final and fifth ingredient for engagement is closing. I once met a woman who was about yay tall and introduced herself to me as a professional storyteller. She was yay tall, all white hair, and I asked her, what's your number one tip for telling really phenomenal stories? And her response was simple. Just know the first sentence you're going to say and the last sentence you're going to say. You can fill in the rest in between. And I think when you're designing online meetings for engagement, the variation of her advice is know how you're going to open, right, with that unofficial start, connection before content, and know how you're going to close. So often we get to the end of our meeting and we forgot to close with some purpose or intention. And so think about having some deliberate exercise, and in future videos linked here, we will unpack some ideas around how to close a meeting really impactfully. There's a number of exercises that you can do it. For right now, just think about being really deliberate about how you close, and I would invite you again to invite people to close with your team's words or your group's words or your class's words rather than your own. Because if you close with a nice motivational thing, that's designing a meeting for consumption, not contribution, as opposed to everybody sharing a closing statement or a one word in all caps in the chat with how they feel. All right, those are the 5 ingredients to spark really meaningful engagement in online meetings. So a couple quick tips as a reward if you've made it to this point in the video. One of the most impactful things to reduce Zoom burnout is to hide self-view. Find the option on whatever platform you're on to hide self-view. Humans were not designed to stare at themselves while in a meeting. And so figure out how to hide self-view. It will take off a massive cognitive load off of your brain and your participants' brain, anybody in the meeting. And so the fourth and final tip to end us with a question is use questions. Adults tend to ask 6 to 12 questions per day, whereas kids tend to ask 300 to 400 per day. Somewhere along the line, we lost our curiosity. If you want to design meetings for online engagement, start weaving more questions into your agenda. I chose this question in particular because it's a really powerful representation, if you will, of acknowledging what your group knows, pulling on your group's expertise. Because going back to our original quote, right? Everybody you know, everybody you will ever meet knows something you don't. And so when you ask questions, you get to access that knowledge, the productivity in your team goes up, the engagement in your meeting goes up. I hope this video was massively useful. Have an awesome day.